Right now, we're setting off on a true crime-style journey to uncover something absolutely massive. We are looking for the invisible source code of modern wealth and power. We're going to pull back the curtain on how extreme wealth really operates in our society today. And we're not talking about shadowy conspiracies here, but completely legal, everyday mechanics. It's a fascinating and, honestly, slightly unsettling ride. So let's get right into this explainer.
Part 1. The Miami Briefcase Heist.
Okay, every good mystery starts with a heist, right? So let's dive into this by looking at a highly specific, totally surprising anecdote that perfectly grounds the economic theory we're going to explore. Picture this. It's Miami. The year is 1973. A banking executive from the Bahamas flies into town for a date. The woman he's meeting picks him up, but what he doesn't know is that she's actually a private investigator. They make a quick stop at her apartment before dinner, and he leaves his briefcase there. Well, while they're out, the friend who set them up, who just so happens to be a secret informant for the IRS intelligence unit, sneaks into the apartment. He opens the briefcase, meticulously photographs all the files inside, and puts it right back exactly as he found it. The executive comes back, grabs his briefcase, and flies home, completely unaware of what just went down.
So what exactly was in those photographs? It was an absolute treasure trove. The files contained a massive list of this bank's clients. And while investigators fully expected to find organized crime figures in there, the vast majority of the names were actually some of the richest people in America. It was hard, undeniable proof that the ultra-rich were moving staggering amounts of money offshore just to evade the state. Now, this should have been the greatest triumph in IRS history, right? But instead, the new director of the IRS stepped in and personally shut the entire investigation down. He argued it wasn't a proper use of resources and literally pivoted the agency's focus away from the 0.1% and back toward typical crime. They essentially chose to turn a blind eye to protect the wealthy.
Part 2. What oligarchy actually means. That historical cover-up perfectly sets the stage for us to completely rethink the nature of power. We really need to redefine a term most of us think we learned in high school civics class. Scholar Jeffrey Winters redefines the concept of oligarchy for us. You know, we usually think of oligarchs as a small group of guys running a government, but Winters argues that wealth itself is an autonomous form of power. And when you reach a certain extreme level of wealth, your primary obsession becomes using that power to defend your wealth. Historically, oligarchs hired literal armies to protect their gold from other oligarchs. Today, well, the state already protects their physical property, so modern oligarchs use their massive power to defend their wealth from the state itself, specifically from being taxed.
So forget the traditional view of 10 guys in a smoky room pulling the levers of a government. The modern reality is a vast class of the ultra-rich using their near-limitless resources to evade the state's reach. To perfectly illustrate this, look no further than the 1990s infomercial scammer Kevin Trudeau. When the U.S. government finally caught up with his fraudulent health and memory scams, they ordered him to pay back nearly $40 million. But Trudeau's managers had already moved his fortune to Belize, Liechtenstein, and Mauritius. He used his wealth to completely evade the jurisdiction of his own government. The takeaway here is that you don't have to be a politician to be an oligarch. You literally just need enough money to opt out of the system.
Part 3. The wealth defense industry.
So you might be wondering, how exactly do thousands of ultra-rich individuals magically make their money disappear from the government's view? Let's pull back the curtain on the surprisingly mundane machinery that makes all this evasion possible. The absolutely crucial point here is that this isn't being orchestrated by some shadowy cabal. If you want to picture the real architects of modern oligarchy, just imagine a guy in a nice tailored suit sitting in an office building. This is the wealth defense industry. It's a massive, highly pragmatic network made up of everyday professions: lawyers, accountants, lobbyists, tax experts, and political operatives. They don't view themselves as evil at all. They're just highly paid professionals doing a job. And their sole job is to construct incredibly complex mazes of shell companies and offshore trusts. The goal is super simple: muddy the link between an asset and its owner. Because if the government can't figure out who owns the money, they can't tax it.
And let me tell you, they are incredibly good at what they do. $500 billion. That is the staggering estimated amount of money that governments around the world miss out on collecting in taxes every single year because of this global shadow financial system. And why does this matter to you? Because the math is entirely zero-sum. Studies have shown that to make up for the taxes the ultra-rich successfully hide, the average citizen is forced to pay roughly 15% more in taxes. You are quite literally footing the bill for their wealth defense.
Part 4. Who really drives policy? If this system is so obviously lopsided and it costs the average person so much out of pocket, it begs a massive question. In a democracy, why can't the majority of us simply vote to fix it?
Well, this brings us to an absolute bombshell finding from a sprawling 2014 Princeton study that looked at thousands of policy cases over 2 decades. The researchers found that, quote, average citizens' preferences have essentially zero estimated impact upon policy change. Let that sink in for a second. The study essentially proved that the average voter only gets what they want if it coincidentally aligns with what economic elites already want. If the ultra-rich want a policy, it has a very high probability of passing. If the rest of the country wants a policy that conflicts with the wealthy, it practically flatlines. So how is this even possible in a functioning democracy? It really comes down to what we focus our attention on. Think of political issues in 2 dimensions. Vertical issues deal with the concentration of wealth. It's the wealthy at the top versus everyone else at the bottom. We're talking things like taxes and monopolies. Horizontal issues, on the other hand, are the things that divide the rest of us left and right. Culture wars, religion, social conflicts. Our politics and our media focus overwhelmingly on those horizontal issues. And while those issues are deeply felt and very real, fiercely debating them actually distracts the public from uniting on vertical economic realities. As long as we are busy pointing fingers at each other horizontally, oligarchs have a wide-open playing field right at the top.
Part 5. Oligarchy in American History.
To really see how this builds, we have to trace this exact vertical conflict, wealth versus democracy, all the way back to the founding source code of the United States. When we look at the historical transcripts from the Constitutional Convention, scholar Jeffrey Winters points out a truly fascinating narrative. The founders were pioneering a democracy, sure, but they were actually deeply worried about the poor majority having too much power over the wealthy minority. James Madison explicitly warned that under a pure democracy, those who labor under the hardships of life would heavily outnumber the wealthy, and that power would, in his words, slide into the hands of the former. So the U.S. Constitution was deliberately designed by founders like Madison to prevent what they called a tyranny of the majority from using democratic voting to strip property and wealth from the rich.
We're generally taught to revere this system of checks and balances, but Winters argues we should actually view this as a deliberate legislative bottleneck. Think about it. Originally, only the House of Representatives was voted on directly by the people. The Senate was chosen by state legislatures, the president by an electoral college, and the Supreme Court was appointed by the president. For the democratic will of the people to actually become a law, it has to survive this entire gauntlet. These institutions were explicitly designed to act as roadblocks, places where unelected bodies could legally block the majority from passing laws that threatened elite wealth.
Just look at the timeline of the Gilded Age to see exactly how that bottleneck works in practice. In the late 1800s, extreme inequality sparked a massive democratic backlash. The people were demanding change, and in 1894, Congress finally passed a federal income tax. But just 1 year later, a 5-4 decision by the unelected Supreme Court struck it down as completely unconstitutional. 5 men overruled millions of voters. Because of that structural bottleneck, it took a brutal 20-year political fight to finally pass a constitutional amendment in 1913 just to allow the government to tax the rich. That is the tension between democracy and oligarchy baked right into the system.
Part 6. How the system changes.
So knowing all this history and the mechanics of how wealth protects itself, what does it actually take to push back against this entrenched machinery today? Well, the frustrating part is that the immediate solutions aren't exactly mysteries. We have clear tools at our disposal right now. We have a Corporate Transparency Act on the books that could ban anonymous shell companies entirely. We could adequately fund the IRS specifically to bypass the wealth defense industry and audit ultra-rich tax evaders. We could even implement a direct wealth tax, but these highly pragmatic solutions are constantly and aggressively neutralized. The wealth defense industry lobbies against them, pushes for loopholes and exemptions, and paralyzes the political process to ensure these tools are never fully utilized.
So how do we actually break a gridlock like that? The harsh historical reality is that minor tweaks usually aren't enough to overcome this level of entrenched power. Major structural transformations, like the ones that finally ended the extreme inequality of the Gilded Age, didn't happen overnight. They required decades of public pressure and clamoring for change, which was ultimately catalyzed by massive historical ruptures or crises. It quite literally took the trauma of the Great Depression and the World Wars to create the political opening necessary to rewrite the rules of wealth and power and force deep structural change.
Which brings us to the final and really the most crucial question to leave you with today. Are we ready for a rupture? We are living in a time of extreme, in-your-face oligarchy that absolutely rivals the Gilded Age. The tension between democratic will and the defense of immense wealth is stretching thinner by the day. We have to start seeing the invisible structures all around us, questioning the very DNA of our political systems and demanding real transparency. Because history tells us for a fact that a window for deep, foundational change will eventually arrive. The only question is, when that crisis hits, will we have the ideas and the momentum ready to finally build a fair system? Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining us on this explainer.